The archivist was not a man who drew attention. In fact, most people at the university could not recall his name, though they had seen him pass through the shadowed corridors carrying stacks of brittle parchment. His days were spent in the archives, where dust lay thick over shelves that no professor or eager student cared to visit. He had no rank, no title that demanded respect, only a quiet devotion to the forgotten words of centuries past. But one evening, as the echo of footsteps faded from the library above, and silence pressed down like a heavy cloak, he noticed something unusual. The Bible in front of him, bound in leather blackened with age, was not like the others. Its spine cracked with the faintest touch, but the pages whispered secrets in faded ink that had survived hundreds of years. Between the lines of Holy Scripture, faint symbols appeared, strange clusters of dots and lines hidden in the spaces of the margins. They were too deliberate to be the idle doodles of a monk, too precise to be random. He leaned closer, holding the candle so the wax nearly dripped onto the page. His heart beat faster. He whispered aloud, "This is no prayer. This is a code." The words startled even him. For years, he had been the quiet keeper of other men's knowledge, never the one to declare a discovery. But something inside told him this was different. The Bible was dated from the 14th century, copied in a monastery long vanished into ruins. He knew such texts often contained marginalia, scribbled notes, illustrations. But never had he seen symbols woven with such intent, like a second language layered over scripture. Memories stirred. His grandfather, a man of little education but deep reverence for old tales, had once told him, "The church hides what it fears most. If you ever find something scratched between the lines, look twice." At the time, he had dismissed it as folklore. Now, he felt a chill at how those words resurfaced. The archivist's fingers trembled as he traced the first cluster of markings. Could they be coordinates? A cipher? He pulled his journal closer, copying them with careful precision. The candle sputtered, shadows shifting across the vaulted ceiling. For the first time in years, the air of the archive felt alive, charged with the breath of something waiting to be uncovered. He thought of the professor's upstairs men, who spoke loudly of their own brilliance, who never bothered to greet the archivist, except to demand a manuscript be fetched. They saw him as invisible. What would they say if they knew that in his hands lay a secret older than their proudest lectures? He imagined their scoffs, their laughter echoing in the lecture hall. Still, he could not look away from the page. One symbol repeated itself across multiple passages, always adjacent to verses about death and resurrection. It looked like a cross, but twisted, doubled back on itself, marked with tiny circles. He had seen it once before in an illustration of a tomb, sealed by the Church of Avignon during a time of plague. A forbidden mark, the notes had called it. His pulse quickened. "This Bible is more than a prayer book," he murmured. "It's a warning." Yet a voice within, quiet but persistent, urged him forward. "If you are the only one to see it, then perhaps you were meant to." He closed the book, pressing his palm against its rough cover, as though to still his racing thoughts. Already, he knew he would not sleep. He would stay, candle after candle, ink staining his fingers, until he understood. For the first time in his life, the quiet archivist did not feel invisible. He felt chosen. But he also felt the weight of danger. The code was not meant to be seen. Whoever had hidden it had trusted time and dust to bury their secret. And now, centuries later, a forgotten man, in a forgotten corner, had disturbed it. He blew out the candle, leaving the archive in darkness. Yet the image of the twisted cross burned bright in his mind. Whatever lay at the end of this code, it was not meant for curious eyes. Still, he knew he would pursue it. He had no choice. If you're enjoying this story of justice and hidden strength, don't forget to subscribe to the channel to find out how a simple act of prejudice turned into the most valuable lesson of the professor's life. The archivist gathered his notes and tucked the Bible under lock and key. Outside, the wind howled against the stone walls as though warning him back. But the archivist did not hear the warning, only the whisper of a secret calling him deeper. Morning sunlight streamed through the tall, arched windows of the university hall, gilding the dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. The archivist sat nervously at the back of the grand chamber, his notes clutched tightly in his hand. Before him, professors in tailored robes of crimson and black filled the room with their booming voices, their laughter bouncing off the walls. They spoke of kings, dynasties, and ancient wars, each trying to outshine the other with clever phrasing and dramatic pauses. The archivist had rehearsed what he would say, though his voice trembled even in his own imagination. He had spent the night transcribing the mysterious symbols, testing possible substitutions, comparing them against medieval ciphers he had studied quietly in the shadows of the archive. He could not decipher the whole message, but enough fragments emerged to convince him. This was no accident of ink. It was a deliberate code, and it pointed to something hidden, sealed away in secrecy. He rose when there was a pause in the discourse, clutching the fragile Bible as though it were a shield. "Professors," he began softly, his voice barely rising above the shuffle of parchment. I believe I've discovered something in this manuscript." Dozens of eyes turned toward him, most with irritation, some with outright surprise. The archivist was a shadow, a servant, not a speaker. What audacity gave him the right to break the current of their debate? Professor Lemaire, the eldest of them all, raised a bushy brow. "You?" he scoffed, his tone cutting through the hall like a blade. "And what, pray, could our quiet archivist possibly have discovered that the rest of us overlooked?" Heat rose in the archivist's cheeks. His fingers tightened on the Bible's spine, but he pressed forward. "This copy of the scripture, copied in Avignon, 14th century, it contains markings, a cipher. The symbols are not decorative. They repeat at key verses concerning death. When examined, they reveal a message. Though incomplete, it speaks of a tomb." A silence hung for a heartbeat. Then, laughter erupted. "A tomb," one professor barked. "And next, you'll tell us the angels buried gold beneath the monastery." Another shook his head, lips curling into a cruel smile. "The archivist has been reading too many romances by candlelight. Codes in the Bible? Preposterous." The archivist swallowed hard. His pulse pounded in his ears. He wanted desperately to vanish into the shadows of the archive where he belonged. Yet, his conviction pressed him to continue. "I only ask you to look," he said quietly. "The marks are there, hidden in plain sight. I believe they point to—" "Enough!" Professor Lemaire's voice cracked like thunder. His gnarled hand slapped the table. "This institution is not a place for peasant fables. You guard books, nothing more. Leave the interpretation to men who were trained for it." A ripple of agreement passed among the scholars. They turned their eyes away from him as though he no longer existed. Some chuckled, whispering under their breath about the fool who mistook smudges for secrets. The archivist's throat tightened, but he forced himself to stand still, his knuckles white around the Bible. Deep inside, a storm raged. He heard again his grandfather's words about secrets hidden between the lines, warnings buried by the fearful. For a moment, he wanted to shout, to demand they see what he had seen. But pride would not serve him. Not yet. He bowed his head, gathered his notes, and returned to his seat in silence. The professors resumed their debates as though he had never spoken. But within, the archivist's resolve hardened. If no one else would believe, then he would unravel the code himself. Mockery had lit a fire that no laughter could extinguish. As he left the hall, he heard one last cruel whisper from a young scholar behind him. "The fool thinks he's a discoverer now." The archivist walked on without turning, though inside he repeated to himself, "They will see. One day, they will all see." The silence of the archive that night was almost oppressive, broken only by the scratch of the archivist's quill across parchment. Candle stubs flickered in their brass holders, the flames wavering as if unsettled by what they illuminated. Spread before him lay the ancient Bible, its pages fragile as dried leaves. The archivist's eyes, rimmed red with exhaustion, scanned the symbols again and again, chasing the threads of a mystery that had already consumed him. He copied each mark, lining them carefully in columns. Dots, crosses, twisted curves. At first they seemed like nonsense, but now patterns began to emerge. Certain symbols recurred in the same places, often adjacent to passages about resurrection or forbidden burial grounds. When he arranged them in sequence, letters took form, crude, incomplete, but undeniable. Sepulchrum clausum, he whispered. The sealed tomb. His heart clenched. The phrase felt heavy, as though it carried the weight of centuries. He sat back, trembling. The monks who had copied this book had hidden a message so carefully that only a patient eye could see it. And why? What was so terrible that it must be veiled beneath scripture? He reached for another folio, cross-referencing. Hours passed in a blur of ink and wax drippings. Gradually, a fuller sentence took shape. Sepulchrum clausum sub abbot. The sealed tomb beneath the abbot. The archivist froze. Beneath the abbot? Did this mean a monastery's foundations concealed the burial? Memories surged of his childhood, when he had wandered ruins with his grandfather in the countryside. Among them was the husk of a monastery, abandoned since plague years. Local lore whispered of a hidden crypt where priests buried those deemed unworthy of holy ground. Could it be the same? A shiver ran through him. His rational mind urged caution. Perhaps it was allegory, a symbolic teaching buried in code. Yet the symbols persisted, clear as a map, waiting to be followed. The archivist lowered his head into his hands, struggling to steady his breath. What am I doing? He thought. I am a servant of books, not a seeker of tombs. But another voice, quieter yet stronger, rose inside him. If no one else will seek the truth, then it falls to you. You alone have seen it. You alone must follow it. He looked again at the twisted cross symbol, scattered throughout the code. It was the same mark he had seen in drawings of plague-sealed crypts, used to warn the living to keep away. The realization struck him like a hammer. This was no random secret, this was a deliberate concealment. A burial that the church itself had wanted forgotten. He leaned closer to the page, his pulse racing. The words whispered back at him. Sub abbate. Beneath the monastery. His candle sputtered low, shadows clutching the corners of the archive. The archivist pressed his notes to his chest, as though to guard them from unseen eyes. He imagined the monks centuries ago, their trembling hands hiding this message within scripture, terrified of discovery. He wondered if they too had felt this same dread in the stillness of night. A sound broke his thoughts, the creak of wood in the corridor beyond. He stiffened, clutching the Bible closed. For a heartbeat, he imagined the professors had followed him, ready to strip him of the book and laugh at his foolishness. But no voice came, no footsteps, only silence returned. Still, the warning was clear. Secrecy was now his only ally. The archivist whispered to himself, voice hoarse, I cannot show them, not yet. They would destroy it, or worse, bury it deeper. With slow hands, he tucked the Bible into a locked chest beneath his desk. His notes he slid into the lining of his coat. If the professors mocked him again, they would never know how close he was to proving them wrong. He doused the candle and sat in darkness, the final words of the code burning in his mind like fire. The sealed tomb. And though fear coiled in his gut, stronger still was the pull of destiny. He had crossed a threshold. There was no turning back. The archivist's hands shook as he unfolded the brittle pages once more, the candlelight licking the faded ink. For 2 nights he had labored without rest, and exhaustion pressed heavily on his shoulders, yet he could not stop. Each symbol he traced, each letter he deciphered, revealed a clearer path. And then, almost by accident, he saw it. The code was not only text. Hidden among the margins of the Bible was an illustration, faint and nearly rubbed away. At first glance, it seemed nothing more than a monk's idle sketch, lines crossing like vines, arcs bending across the page. But as he held it up to the light, The image transformed. A map! He staggered back, his chair scraping loudly across the stone floor. A map had been embedded into Holy Scripture, drawn so faintly it would vanish to any eye that did not linger. He traced the curving lines with his finger, his breath catching when he recognized the shape of valley he had seen as a child, carved into the landscape near the abandoned monastery ruins. "The monastery," he whispered. "It's there." The memory of those ruins rose in his mind. Crumbling arches swallowed by ivy, hollow windows staring into emptiness. Villagers spoke of curses, of shadows moving at night. His grandfather had warned him never to go too near. Yet here, centuries-old ink seemed to beckon him back. His pulse thundered. The twisted cross symbol appeared again, etched at the end of the lines, marking a single spot below the monastery walls, a small circle encased in warning strokes. It was not a place for prayer. It was a seal. The archivist slumped into his chair, clutching his head. He could almost hear the voices of the professors laughing at the very thought. They would never believe it, and worse, they would snatch the credit if he dared reveal it now. His discovery would be mocked, twisted, buried under their authority. A war raged within him. He was no explorer, no adventurer. He was a man who catalogued books, who mended torn bindings with careful stitches. Could he truly walk into forbidden ruins, guided only by ink and instinct? He closed his eyes, and a memory surfaced: his grandfather, standing by the hearth, telling stories of men who followed truth, even when the world called them fools. "The bravest are not those who shout the loudest," the old man had said. "They are the ones who walk quietly into the dark and return with the light." The archivist's chest tightened. His quiet life, his years of invisibility, had led to this moment. Perhaps he was not chosen for boldness, but for patience. The patience to see what arrogant men overlooked. Determination hardened in his veins. He gathered his notes, copied the map with careful strokes, and tucked it into his coat. The monastery was 2 days' travel away. He would go alone, under cover of night. As he locked the Bible away one final time, a strange calm settled over him. Fear still gnawed, but it was tempered by resolve. He had seen the signs. He knew the path. And though every instinct warned of danger, he could not deny the pull of destiny. The candle guttered low, plunging the archive into deep shadow. In that silence, the archivist whispered a promise to himself: "I will find the tomb." And somewhere in the distance, beyond the walls of the university, the ruined monastery waited, its stones heavy with secrets, its soil guarding what should never have been disturbed. The journey to the monastery was quiet, the kind of silence that pressed against the skin and filled the lungs with tension. The archivist moved through the countryside like a shadow, careful not to draw attention from villagers or passing travelers. Every step brought him closer to the ruins, but also closer to the unknown, to the tomb whispered of in faded ink centuries before. By dusk, he reached the monastery. It stood as a skeletal relic of its former glory, walls crumbling, arches yawning like open mouths, ivy crawling up the stones as if to reclaim them. A chill ran through him. The air smelled of damp earth and decay, the wind whistling through broken windows with the hollow sound of voices long gone. He drew a deep breath and unfolded the map again, tracing the lines that led to the hidden chamber beneath the abbot's quarters. The twisted cross symbol marked the entrance. He recognized it immediately, carved faintly into a stone lintel above a partially collapsed staircase leading downward. The mark seemed to pulse under his gaze, as though warning him to turn back, but he did not. With cautious steps, he descended into the darkness, using only the flicker of his lantern to guide him. The stairs groaned under his weight, dust cascading from the walls like faint echoes of the past. Shadows danced across ancient carvings, angels with twisted faces, cryptic inscriptions that had not seen human eyes in centuries. Every turn seemed a test, every fallen stone a deliberate obstacle. A sudden noise, a scrape of stone against stone, made him freeze. Heart pounding, he held his breath. The monastery was empty. Only the wind and his own echo answered. He pressed on, the feeling of being watched crawling along his spine. The code had warned him, and yet it did not speak of companions, of enemies, only of the tomb, waiting to be found. He arrived at a door sealed by iron bands, rusted over centuries. Etched upon it was the same twisted cross, encircled by symbols of warning and protection. He ran his fingers over the grooves, the cold biting through his gloves. His chest tightened. Whatever lay beyond this threshold had been hidden for a reason. The archivist knelt and examined the mechanism. The lock was intricate, designed to keep the curious out, yet the code he had deciphered contained hints, a pattern embedded in the Bible that mirrored the tumblers in the lock. With painstaking patience, he aligned the iron pieces, whispering the symbols to himself as if reciting a prayer. A click echoed through the corridor. The door shuddered, then slowly creaked open. Darkness beyond yawned, thick and heavy, smelling of soil and ancient decay. He lifted his lantern, illuminating stone steps spiraling downward into the earth. Each step was a descent not only into the tomb, but into history itself. A sudden thought struck him. If the code was right, the chamber had been sealed intentionally to prevent discovery. Why? What secret could the church have feared enough to hide it for centuries? The answer was close, yet forbidden, like the shadows that now enveloped him. He pressed on, the flicker of the lantern casting long, trembling shadows on the walls. The silence was complete except for his careful footsteps, until finally he reached the chamber. The tomb lay before him, carved from a single block of stone, covered in warnings and religious symbols. The archivist's hands trembled as he brushed dust from the surface. This was it, the culmination of nights of labor, mockery, and doubt. The tomb was no ordinary grave. It radiated significance, a presence that made him feel small, yet inexplicably chosen to witness it. And as he paused, lantern hovering above the stone, a whisper of air stirred through the chamber. The tomb waited, and the archivist knew that the greatest revelation, the secret hidden for centuries, was about to unveil itself. The tomb's door was massive, carved from a single slab of stone and etched with cryptic symbols that seemed to writhe in the flickering lantern light. The archivist pressed his palm to its surface, feeling the cool weight of centuries. Dust and cobwebs clung to every groove, and a faint metallic scent drifted up from beneath the edges. This was no ordinary resting place. It had been prepared with care, with intention, and with a sense of fear. He traced the twisted cross symbols along the stone, recalling the code that had guided him here. Every mark matched precisely, a silent testament to the intelligence and caution of the monks who had hidden it. They had known someone would eventually come, yet they trusted that only a patient, observant soul could succeed. He realized with a shiver that centuries of secrecy had led him here, a man no one had noticed until now. With a deep breath, he pushed against the stone. It moved with a grinding resistance, shifting slowly as dust poured into the air. He felt the weight of history pressing down, an invisible hand urging caution. The chamber beyond was pitch black, yet he dared to step inside, lantern held high. The floor was littered with remnants of the past, fragments of pottery, crumbling manuscripts, and decayed religious artifacts. Yet at the center of the room, untouched by time's decay, lay what had been hidden for generations. A stone sarcophagus, adorned with intricate carvings that depicted kings and knights, angels and demons, all interwoven in a story that no historian had ever read. His breath caught. The archivist recognized some symbols, heraldic markings of medieval rulers, their coats of arms subtly altered, as if someone had rewritten history in stone. These were not simply relics. They were statements, messages of power, lineage, and secrecy. He approached cautiously, running a finger over the carvings. Suddenly, a panel slid open, revealing a narrow cavity inside the sarcophagus. There, wrapped in decayed velvet, lay manuscripts sealed with wax, their contents untouched by time. He lifted the first document with reverence, careful not to tear the brittle paper. The ink was faded but legible, and as he read, the truth became horrifyingly clear. These were records that contradicted established history, revealing hidden heirs, forbidden alliances, and kings whose names had been erased from chronicles. The archivist's mind raced. Every lesson he had learned about humility and patience now converged on this moment. He realized why the church had hidden this tomb. It was not gold or jewels that were dangerous. It was knowledge. Knowledge that could shatter the carefully constructed narrative of power. He sat on the cold stone floor, heart pounding, overwhelmed by the enormity of his discovery. The code, the map, the hidden chamber, all had been designed to protect these truths. And now, after centuries of mockery, derision, and silence, he alone held the key. Yet even in triumph, he felt the shadow of danger. The professors who had laughed at him, the scholars who dismissed his quiet diligence, they would seek this knowledge, and not for the sake of truth. They would covet it, exploit it, and claim it as their own. He knew he must act carefully, for the tomb's revelation was both a blessing and a burden. The lantern flickered again, casting long shadows across the stone walls. The archivist closed his eyes, taking a deep breath. Here, in this forgotten tomb beneath the monastery, he understood something profound. The measure of a person was not in their recognition by the world, but in their courage to pursue truth against all odds. He whispered a vow to the empty chamber. I will protect this knowledge. I will honor it. And one day, the world will understand why it was hidden. Word of the archivist's discovery leaked, as such things inevitably do, carried by whispers and careless glances. Within weeks, the very professors who had mocked him began arriving at the university archives, feigning concern while their eyes glinted with calculation. They had heard rumors of a hidden chamber beneath the monastery, of manuscripts that could rewrite history, and their curiosity was laced with greed. The archivist, quiet and steadfast, anticipated their arrival. He had spent nights preparing, cataloging every symbol, every parchment, every clue. His patience, mocked so often in lecture halls, was now his shield. Yet the moment the professors stepped into the archive, their haughty smiles and condescending tones ignited something within him. Professor Lemaire, the oldest and cruelest of the lot, stepped forward first. So, our invisible archivist believes he has uncovered the greatest secret of medieval Europe, he sneered, brushing imaginary dust from his robe. Shall we see this miracle of yours, or must we trust in your fragile imagination? The archivist remained silent, letting the manuscripts speak for themselves. He laid out the parchment, the maps, and the coded Bible, and as the professors leaned in, the air thickened with disbelief. They scrutinized the symbols, the faded illustrations, the careful alignment of ink that had survived centuries. This cannot be real, stammered a younger scholar. These documents, they contradict everything we know. Entire lineages erased, tombs unrecorded. It's impossible. Lemaire's face twisted with both fury and envy. You dare present this as fact? You, who have no title, no claim to scholarship? Do you realize the consequences of such claims? The archivist's jaw tightened. He thought back to their laughter, to the humiliation he had endured merely for voicing his observations. And yet, he remained calm, the fire within him tempered by patience and the knowledge that the truth had long awaited its witness. This is not a claim, he said softly, voice steady. It is evidence. It is history that was hidden because someone feared it. You may try to rewrite it in your favor, but the truth is here. A tense silence filled the room, broken only by the rustle of parchment. The professors glanced at each other, calculating, scheming. Lemaire's hand twitched toward the manuscripts, an instinctive attempt to seize control, but the archivist anticipated it. He stepped forward, placing a hand firmly over the documents. Take only what you are willing to understand, he said. Do not let arrogance blind you. History belongs not to the loudest voice, but to those who respect it. For a moment, The professors faltered, seeing the quiet strength in the man they had mocked. Lemaire's eyes narrowed, and a flash of recognition passed over his features. This archivist, whom he had dismissed, had achieved what none of them could. And then, almost imperceptibly, the room seemed to shift. The power dynamics reversed. The professors, who had once ruled with voice and title, now looked small, their pride exposed. It was a subtle but undeniable triumph. Knowledge earned through diligence and humility had prevailed over arrogance and entitlement. The archivist released the manuscripts, letting them rest on the table. "Remember," he said quietly, "the measure of a scholar is not in being believed, but in seeking the truth. This tomb, these documents, they have waited centuries. They will outlast us all, regardless of who claims credit." The professors, beaten not by force but by integrity and revelation, could only nod, a mixture of awe and resentment etched into their faces. The archivist turned, returning to the quiet of the archives, his work complete, yet his journey far from over. In that moment, he understood the final lesson the tomb had imparted. Truth cannot be owned by arrogance. It is revealed only to those patient enough, humble enough, and courageous enough to seek it. Weeks had passed since the confrontation in the archive, and life, remarkably, had settled into a quiet rhythm for the archivist. The monastery, once a place of shadows and whispers, had been documented, its maps and hidden tombs meticulously recorded in his private journals. Scholars came and went, but now with respect rather than scorn. Some whispered of the discoveries, others sought guidance, but none attempted to claim the tomb's secrets outright. The archivist walked among the stacks, handling manuscripts with the reverence of one who had glimpsed eternity. He remembered the first night he had found the code in the medieval Bible, the thrill, the fear, the sense of destiny, and he realized how far he had come. What had once been mockery and doubt had transformed into acknowledgement, but more importantly, into understanding. The moral of patience and quiet diligence had proven stronger than arrogance. In the afternoons, he would climb the hill to the monastery ruins, now peaceful under the sun. The once ominous stones had softened in his eyes, transformed by knowledge into monuments of resilience and hidden wisdom. The tomb he had uncovered remained sealed physically, but its history was now immortalized in careful records that would endure, safeguarded by his hand and conscience. He thought of the professors who had ridiculed him. Some had apologized subtly, others remained in silent envy, but all had been forced to confront their own arrogance. The archivist did not gloat. Humility, he had learned, was not merely for the meek, it was the vessel through which truth survives. The lessons of centuries, embedded in ink and stone, had been revealed not through force or wealth, but through quiet determination and integrity. Late one evening, he opened the Bible again, tracing the faded symbols one last time. He reflected on the men who had tried to claim superiority over knowledge, and the monks who had hidden the code so carefully. Their fear had preserved the secret, and his patience had honored it. In that moment, he felt a deep connection across the centuries, a line of guardians who valued truth above recognition. The villagers, who once avoided the ruins, now looked upon the archivist with curiosity and respect. A few students approached, timidly asking about the maps and codes. He shared what he could, emphasizing the lessons rather than the treasures, teaching that discovery was as much about character as it was about knowledge. Each question answered, each cautious explanation given, felt like a tribute to the centuries of wisdom he had unearthed. As the sun set over the hills, painting the monastery in shades of gold and violet, he allowed himself a rare smile. He thought of his grandfather's words, "The bravest are not those who shout the loudest. They are the ones who walk quietly into the dark and return with the light." The archivist had done just that. In the end, the tomb's secrets were safe, its story told by the one who had listened patiently, observed carefully, and acted with unwavering humility. And the moral remained clear. True strength lies not in arrogance, but in patience, integrity, and the courage to seek truth when no one else believes it exists. The quiet archivist returned to his work, not seeking fame, not desiring recognition, but knowing that in preserving and honoring the hidden truths of the past, he had achieved something far greater than any applause. He had fulfilled a legacy of justice, wisdom, and silent courage. If this story touched you, subscribe to the channel to discover more stories about how extraordinary people turn humiliation into triumph.